Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Inclusion Starts Now, where you get to talk to me and my guests on the show. I'm so excited today. We are going to talk to two parents. We're going to talk to Brittany and Courtney, and they are really at the beginning stages of their IEP process with their kids. And they live in two different states, and it's just so fun to hear about the different kinds of like barriers that they're knocking down. And they have such great advice for parents, for teams, for teachers. And I am just so excited for you to hear what they have to say. Thank you so much for being here and enjoy our conversation. But okay. Anyways, I'm so excited that you guys are here. I love your I feel like your podcast is the reason why I wanted more guests even on mine because I just love how you two like talk to each other and it's like you guys are like so fun to listen to. Like you guys are very much the classic, like you're listening to a podcast and you're like, yeah, I'm talking to them too. Like they can hear me, my responses. And are you guys still doing your podcast right now?
We're taking like a little hiatus. It's
Yeah.
between like school and also just kids getting sick constantly.
Well, do you want to talk about what your podcast is called and like why you guys bitch on your podcast?
Sure. Courtney, you want to take it away?
Of course. So our podcast is bitching and bolusing, and honestly, it really is just that. It was, Brittany came to me one day and was like, "Hey, we should just be doing a podcast." And I'm like, you know what, that would kind of be really fun. And when we talked about doing it, it was more it was kind of a selfish reason on both our parts. Like we were more like, you know what, just talking it out for us is so healthy. And then to also just be like this advocate for our children and for other disabled people, we were like, why not? Like, what's the worst that can happen? Five people listen. Okay, cool. We got five friends. Like,
Yeah.
like what was really the worst that can happen? And that's really what the podcast is we tackle a lot of topics related to disability, but from our lens, as caregivers and parents coming into this really kind of blind in some fashion, and just navigating all the things that we are encountering in this growth and how we change along the way. Like we change even in the show, like from season 1 to season 2. Like you watch our progression. Like we're just constantly learning and growing, and we're trying to tackle a lot of topics that sometimes could be super controversial, and others that are just really, hey, it's just part of the community. So that's the
Yeah.
gist.
Said
Yeah.
perfectly.
Well, I do think it's interesting how many things are controversial like in this group. Like in because I feel like I talk about this a lot with people where I'm like, the disabled community, like we need to find ways to like come together to like lift ourselves up and like keep fighting for inclusion because sometimes I feel like we get stuck on things that I'm like that have the disabled community fighting like within
Yeah.
the community and I'm like you guys, I don't think that's that big. Like, I know language is like it's fickle and it's hard. Like people say
Mhm.
things that we don't like, but like I think we all want to feel like we belong, and I think we need to like, not we're not all gonna completely agree on something, but like to we got to move on from like the little
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
No,
I think it's
exactly.
okay not following the majority. Like, I think that that's a big issue within the community of like caregivers and like teachers, like special ed teachers, anyone who's involved with like, working with the disabled community. I find that sometimes if you stray away from the majority of like the caregiver community, it can feel really messy. And
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think people need to understand like it's okay. Like if there's something you hear and you're like, that's kind of doesn't sit right with me. And like you're making yourself aware of what people in the disabled community are saying. And that's maybe why it's not sitting right with you. It's not a popularity contest.
Yeah.
like so many people treat it like it is and it's not. And like you don't have to, you can be that outspoken minority. like
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah. No,
Yeah. It
I
often
love that. What were you
And
gonna say?
it often becomes like combative sometimes. And it's almost like I just sit there and I'm like, isn't this all about like inclusion, but like not inclusive of different opinions or
Yes.
not inclusive of like,
Yeah.
if you don't follow us, you're like me and Brittany have been outcasted like from
Yeah.
many a group,
Yeah.
simply from doing things like our podcast or saying what we say online. And it's just so interesting that it can be like that. It can be so divided when we really all do have the same goal. And simply because, sometimes we might not align on certain things, or, one group may focus on one issue more than another issue versus another group. Like that doesn't change the goal, but it's like sometimes that community can be really vicious and really divided.
Yeah. Well, I when I talked to our mutual friend Wes about this a lot, because I do listen to him a lot as a
Mhm.
disabled voice, and but like okay, when I talk to him and I'm like, but it's also like such a different perspective coming from like parents and caregivers and like because as a parent, it's like we all want what's best for our kid. Like we would do
Yeah.
whatever we could for our children. And then going from all these like strong opinions and biases, and you're like, well, I'm trying to do what's best for them, but what's also best for like my own mental health. Like I can't be there for them if I'm struggling. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
so it's like so hard to like always navigate all that.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
having to like, constantly be advocating at like the doctors and at
Yeah.
school and in your community. And you're just like, dude, I just like,
Where's the
It's
energy? And so I think that with our podcast specifically, this is kind of why we always say, like, we're not trying to offend people, because we do understand that there's a lot of things we say that people just don't want to hear or don't like hearing or aren't ready to hear it, or like maybe just genuinely don't understand it. And that's totally okay. Like that's fine. And I think it'll be interesting, like on this show, right? Because we're going to talk about something that I think stresses Courtney and I out like to the max out of
yeah,
like all the stuff we do.
yeah.
And it's okay to not be ready to like go into the space where like disabled people are talking. Like get there eventually. You can't completely block that out, but I think it's all a process. Like the whole thing's a
Yeah.
process
mhm.
because it's so overwhelming. Like we're trying to better ourselves, we're trying to better our kids, we're trying to better the schools and the hospitals and the therapy clinics. And it's like
Yeah.
we're banging our heads against the walls sometimes. So
Yeah, it's a lot and it could be so much harder when you have a school where your child spends like the majority of their day that you're like having to fight against. And so you
Yeah.
guys are at two different schools. What are your experiences right now? Are you both in elementary school?
yes.
And by
Yes.
you, I mean your children.
Yes.
I
Yeah. So
almost
both
wish I was back in
I
elementary
know, me
school.
too. Like, oh my gosh.
Life was easy.
So we both like our kids started the whole transition process at the same time from like early intervention to pre-K. So we're on the same exact path. And it's really interesting because that path has looked so different for both of us.
Yeah.
So like when we started the transition personally, we have a really great specialized school in the state. They're just amazing. They have like a pool for pool therapy. Like they
Oh,
have
that's
so
awesome.
many specialists. And when we were starting the transition, I really wanted my son to go to that school because they work specifically with kids who have cerebral palsy, which is my son's diagnosis. And I was like, this is fantastic. The whole school is accessible, like the playground's accessible. And but then I kept going back and forth because I was like, that's like 45 minutes away from us. So that's a long bus ride. But then I was like, we only had my son, my oldest at the time, but we knew we were going to have another child eventually. And we're like, they wouldn't be able to go to the same school.
Mhm.
And that's difficult. But I really wanted my son to go to that school. And so Courtney and I had a lot of conversations about this
Yeah.
because Courtney's son actually did go to a specialized school. Like he ended up getting placed out of district. And so it was really interesting seeing how like Courtney really wanted to push for public school and I really wanted to push for an out of placement. So like we were completely opposite sides.
Yeah, it was kind of funny those early conversations we would have because she'd be like, I just really would love him to be at this school. And I'm like, funny, because I really want him to go to my local elementary school. It was just like complete opposite. And we would just be like, okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense. And that makes sense. But yeah, we did have that deviation in the beginning where from our journeys differed because when we went to get evaluated for his placement, oh, it's probably, was that Luca? Sorry, I've got Lulu over
I
here.
was gonna say there's either a ghost or someone's coming into your house.
What do you need? Oh, hold on. Sorry.
That's okay.
What is this, buddy? All right. All right. Good. You're welcome. Can you close the door, please?
Bye.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so when we had started the process to go into school and we went for our evaluation, our district, they immediately gave the impression that Lino was not a student they can handle. Like it wasn't even a conversation of like, what do you want? It was more like, we can't handle his needs. Like it was right off the bat. So when they told us that they pretty much could not handle his needs, we we wanted to fight it to a certain extent, but honestly, at that point, we were like, you know what? We had looked at a ton of schools in the area and we were like, if they really feel this way, maybe we should trust the fact that like they're saying like, hey, we can't handle his needs. Like I'm just at that moment, I wasn't ready to fight like a whole district and a whole school to be like, what do you mean you can't handle his needs? Like, so we just accepted the out of district placement. And he went, he's actually still goes there right now, but he only goes part-time because he went for 2 years at the out of district school. And what we realized is that, and this is not to shame or say anything about anybody who goes to a specialized school or chooses to, or whatever the case may be, we just felt like for our son and how he is and what I know he likes and what he wants and how smart he is, we just felt it was so segregating. There was such isolation, and there is beauty in the fact that he went, and he still again technically goes to the school where it's fully accessible. It has everything you would want in a school for him. You know, it has various pieces of equipment. It has all the sensory rooms. It has accessible playground. You know, it's all one floor. So he doesn't have to worry about how is he getting anywhere. You know, the teachers and the therapists are so good at modifying things, and they make things for his gait trainer to play soccer and to play hockey and like all these things that you're just like, okay, this is like perfect. This is exactly what you want. But there was minimal to almost none socialization. Like there was just nothing, you know, there was no there was no like, hey, he has a friend at school, or hey, like, being invited to a birthday party. Like there's just nothing. And again, and I don't think this is every specialized school at all. This was just our experience with one school. But those things started to make us feel like, what are we doing here right now? Like, because when he's going to school and all we're focusing on is his therapies, where's the school part? Where's the academics? Like even his like academically, like there just was no advancing. It was just kind of like, I don't know. We just had a lot of issues with how segregating it was and how isolating it felt for him. And it was 30 minutes away. So he took a bus 30 minutes there, 30 minutes back. Our local elementary school is barely 5 minutes in the car, barely.
Us too. Yeah.
And he has a younger brother who is going to go to that elementary school. And then it just became also like, logistically, how are we doing this? How am I getting his little brother at the local elementary school, but then potentially needing to get Lino, who's 30 minutes away? And then I was like, also, shouldn't he just be going to school where his brother goes to school?
Yeah.
That was a
Yeah.
really big point for us. And again, not the only point, because we always want to be sure that Lino's needs were met. We were lucky enough that our district was very open and accommodating when we brought this up, that we were interested in Lino transitioning back to our public elementary school. And we didn't know how this was going to look because, like I said, when we first started this process, they immediately told us they did not have the resources to suit his needs. We happened to ask at a time where the school and the district is trying to actually renovate the entire school, add spaces that are more
Mm.
accessible. Like there's a lot going on in the district because they are trying to stop sending all these children out of district. We're a really small district, very small
That's
district.
really awesome, actually.
Yeah, and it just aligns that way. So when we asked, they were like, "Oh, interestingly enough, this is our
Yeah.
goal." So like the district's goal now moving forward is every student that enters preschool that has a disability that they don't intend on sending out of district. So as long as they can provide the needs that that child needs, they have they're going to create the space to actually accommodate. So
And I
that's how
think
we ended up.
that's like
Yeah.
half the battle of like you want your school to want to do it. Like
Yeah.
that's because that's like where, when you have to keep fighting a school and you're like trying to take them to court or you're going through due process and you're just like, I don't want, like, I want you to want my student, my child to be your student. Like, why,
Yeah.
like that?
And
And yeah.
Courtney and
It,
I had a lot of discussion about that too from our end because from what I understand, so Courtney's district is small. Our district is even smaller.
yeah, for
So
sure.
our district is a one school district. So
Oh,
like
wow.
that's it. And it's really weird because they kind of have like their own rules and like they kind of do their own thing because of that. But from what I know about them, they used to not take kids like my son. They used to always place out of district. So when we were doing transition, it was really surprising that they were like, yeah, come on in. We're like, really? And so that's like something that Courtney and I had talked about because I was like, they genuinely seem like they want my son there.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what I want, right? Like I
Yeah.
want a school that wants him. Um, and Courtney said something really interesting to me, and it's like still stuck in my head. But when we very first had these conversations, Courtney had said, you know, life is not going to be like a specialized school for them. Like once they're out of school, you're in the real world. Like you're not going to have the type of accommodations that you have in a specialized school. Like that's not you're going to be interacting with people who are not disabled. Like you're going to have all of these new experiences once you're out of a specialized school. And I was like, "Oh yeah. Yeah."
Yeah.
But
Like
yeah, yeah, because
mm,
sometimes those specialized schools, to a certain extent, they're they're an idealism. It's not reality. And I had
Hmm.
said to Brittany, I was like, in some way, it's like, how is he going to learn what he needs to advocate for if, unfortunately, he doesn't see
yeah.
how it is, how
Yeah.
there is all this stuff you have to advocate for. Because
Mm,
in some sense, it's like everything was so perfectly accommodating at his specialized school. And again, there is a beauty to that. But it's
Hmm.
like,
But it's not
unfortunately,
like realistic in the
it's
long,
it's
not the real
not.
world.
yeah,
And listen,
unfortunately,
it's not.
Unfortunately.
unless we
It
change it
really,
now.
I
Mhm.
know. But like me and my family, we travel a lot. Lino's a world traveler. He's been to so many places, and we've been to Italy, and we've been to so many places, and like he sees that on a day-to-day basis. Like he does see that, and there is a certain level of like, I want him to be able to recognize that also he needs to be able to advocate for that in him, like not necessarily himself, but understand that that advocacy needs to be across the board. And a
Yeah.
lot of times I find in the state of New Jersey, there's a crap ton of specialized schools here. Like we have so many specialized schools. It's like it's kind of crazy to a certain extent because they really just send a lot of disabled students to these schools. And again, while the concept and the idea is great, and while I think it works for a lot of families and a lot of students, it shouldn't be across the board for everybody. And it shouldn't just be like, oh, well, okay, you're disabled, go here. I just feel like that's also completely non-inclusive. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of schools in from my experience talking to other families in New Jersey don't work towards like inclusive education, like inclusive classrooms, like really really getting things pulled together and accommodating more school students in districts. So it's interesting in New Jersey, I'll say that. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And
no,
that's kind of like
100%.
that's so Courtney, her son, so your son's in like a self-contained classroom, right? For like,
Currently, yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So my son is not. And so we had fought to not have him in a self-contained class. So like as soon as he got in preschool, I was like, no, like he needs to be in general ed. And it's I kind of laugh because he's in school full time now. And he still gets services. So he gets like 2 speech sessions a week, 2 PT sessions, 2 OT sessions. And then he does work with the special ed teacher twice a day. And he goes into her classroom. And like he's in the general ed class a lot, all things considered. And this year I was like, no, he needs to be in the general ed class more.
Yeah.
And like I was just pushing, I'm like, you need to like have push in services. Like you don't need to pull him out.
Yes.
Like you push him in. Like the only thing we really have for him to like be pulled out of is PT because he's working on a power chair. And like he can't really drive a power chair around a bunch of 5-year-olds
Yeah.
right now. Like he's got to go in the hallways. But and they all kind of were like, well, he gets a lot of time in the general ed class. And I'm like, I don't care if you think he gets a lot of time. Like, I want him in there all the time. And you need to figure out how to support him in that environment. Because if you're pulling him out and you're having these one on one or small group sessions with him, you're not learning how to support him in that environment. Like, you're not learning what it looks like if
Mhm.
he is distracted by a whole lot of 5-year-olds, right?
Yeah.
Like you're not learning how to do that. You're not supporting him in those situations. You have him more focused with you, and that's going to look a lot different and not translate over to like the school, the classroom environment. So it's been an interesting thing, and we're still working on it.
Oh yeah. It's
um,
always a work in progress,
it
as we
is.
all are, right?
Yeah. And I think sometimes there's like, well, how can we do that? Like, how can we support him? And it like for me, sometimes it's frustrating because I'm like, isn't like that's not my job. Like I'm telling
But
you what I
also,
want.
but also
Like,
it's not that complicated, I feel. I
I
feel like
know.
sometimes it's thought as like this really super complicated thing. Like I think of this one experience when we first started Lino at our local elementary school, and he started gym there, and the gym teacher like his they were
Oh
just like
God. The gym, like
apparently the
we
gym
had
teacher
gym
had no
situations
idea
too.
what to do. Like the gym
Yeah.
teacher was just like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, well, he's a kid.
Yeah.
He's a kid. I don't know. Play with him. Like it's
Yeah.
Jim. He's a kid and get a little creative. And we were fortunate enough to have like his Leno's nurse show some of the modifications his previous school had made. And the gym teacher was super into it. He was like, "Oh, this is awesome. I'll do that." But it's like it's not that complicated. It was
Yeah.
these weren't complicated modifications. It was like a pool noodle with a hole, and it like pushed the soccer ball and it was on his gate trainer. It's like it's nothing crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I
like just the thought rethinking
yeah.
what like some of those things would look like. It's
And I think we like grew up in like I mean I would say like my generation, our generation growing up in school of you were just supposed to like meet these neat goals, or I don't know. You're just supposed to like meet like what we're doing. Like I don't know, we're all gonna go outside and play dodgeball. Like I grew up in a school where there were no students with disabilities like
Yeah.
in our
Mm-hmm.
classrooms. And if there were kids that are probably now diagnosed with like ADHD or something, they got in trouble a lot. They were known as like the bad student, and
Mm-hmm.
you did not want to be that student. And it's like
Yeah.
looking back at like how traumatizing school must have been for so many people, and now it's like how much I've even rethought education, where I'm like, why were we so strict with like those things? Like, why do we feel like
Mm-hmm.
school, you only can learn this one way?
Yeah.
And I mean, that was a lot of like my graduate school program of like become, because I got my credential in extensive support needs is what it's called. It used to be called moderate severe, and it switched like right when I graduated, which was exciting. But anyways, um, but I felt like there's so much I learned in those classes that I was like, that helped me with like all learners. Like I can be in a general education classroom and like be able to support the kids that are doing really well and like needing more support. And it's like because I got all that practice and I'm like, what are these other teachers learning? Because like now I'm just confused. Like,
Yeah.
what do general ed teachers learn that can't seem to help students who need more support or like that they're struggling
Yeah.
so much with that?
I have that same question because I feel like it should be, meet the child where they're at, or, modify to the student's needs. And I have that same question.
Yeah.
What because I don't know.
I
I
I'm
do
always
know, sorry, I do know this though. My niece is currently she's like studying to be a teacher. And I do know that there were certain classes that were literally just elective though. And I think that's part of the problem. Like it was like inclusion and disability. And like that was like an elective.
Whoa. Oh
Like it wasn't
gosh.
like
Wow.
part of like she had to take this and she chose to take it. But like I think that's interesting too, right? Because
Yeah.
why is that not? And I'm sure there's some level of like inclusion and disability that's in like the core, but the fact that there's like an elective course that really isolates and digs deep into it, and that's elective, I
Yeah.
think that's very telling.
I mean, I knew that
yeah.
there was like one class at my school for the um like early education or whatever their credentials were. I think they had like it was like an intro to disability class.
That's the
And I'm like, that's not
that's
enough.
not
Like,
enough.
No, no. And I'm always
It's
really
not enough.
interested, like we just had an IEP meeting last week. And so like one of the things, like I said, is we're trying to, have more push-in services. And so with that is the special ed. So my son gets pulled out of class 2 times a day for half hour each time to go into the special ed class. The first one is small group. So it's like him and one other kid. And the second one is just like him one-on-one. And I found it really interesting because I was like, well, why are we pulling him out twice? Like, can't he, whatever he's doing in small group, like, can't he do that in the classroom? And so they were talking about, I think I don't know exactly the name of like the lesson that they're doing, but they're like, well, it's kind of fast. And so like he can't keep up with it really. And I'm like, well, how do you know he can't keep up with it? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, it sounds to me like you're making that assumption because he doesn't have the functional communication to say, hey, this is too fast. Like he's never said that to you. And he's never said, like, yes, I fully understand that. I was like, so to assume it's too fast for him simply based on his disability, like right there, big no for me.
mhm.
And then the second point they were trying to make was like, well, the second half of that lesson is handwriting. And so, like, for people who don't know me or know my son, like, he's completely non ambulatory, he's non speaking, but he does have an eye gaze device. He doesn't have a lot of like fine motor control functionality and all that. So I was like, okay, well, he shouldn't be pulled out of the class just because he can't write. Like, why are we not using his eye gaze device for him to do that? Like, teach him, like, either typing on it, right? Like, typing the word out or like putting the words together on his eye gaze device. And I'm just like, this is a poor excuse, in
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
opinion. Like, that's not, and I think a lot of families probably come across that. Like, I mean, it's mind boggling to me because I'm like kids shouldn't. I really struggle that kids are getting pulled out of class or being put in self-contained classrooms. One, because like, you're not presuming competence, right? That happens all the time because these kids, have disabilities or they can't functionally communicate to say like, hey, I understand this. um but also just because they like functionally can't do things like handwriting. Like, it drives me bonkers because it's
Sorry.
so
Krishka, you want to say hi? What can I do for you?
Um, I want I might. Because I think it's like very unrealistic, like this mix of low expectations and high expectations that schools have for students with disabilities, where it's like, um, because like I've also ran into where they're like, oh, well, like he's obviously not understanding this like 100%. So he's like not learning anything from it. And it's like most of the students in the classroom are learning and they're not getting it 100% right. And they're messing up and learning and trying again. So like why are we not using that like that very like normal in quotations like normal way of teaching students? Like why do we not also do that for our disabled students of like okay, they're learning. Like, yeah, they didn't get it the first time. Duh. Like, that's why we're in school.
I'm
Um,
so sorry.
no, that's totally okay. Seriously, like what? Oh, and because you don't put your kids' faces like online, right?
no.
Oh, no, I try not to. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'll make sure that because like I know on the way that I edit it, I can add like stickers to like block people's faces out. So
He's
I'll make
like peeking
sure.
out behind me.
No, it is like just for a second, but he's adorable. But we were just talking about how like teaching, like when teachers or people are like, oh well, this student isn't the disabled student is not understanding this lesson, and it's
Mhm.
like, well, how do you know that? And
Yeah.
also like they're not going to understand it the first time they learn it, as most of the learners are also experiencing the same thing. Like thinking about when I went to school, just because I was able to fake it so much, I mean, I would write. I can't believe how quickly I learned that teachers don't really read what you write when you're having to write like multiple pages. And
Mm-hmm.
I would like restate the question and be like, yeah, Native Americans were living here. And it was so cool that they chose to, or that they were living here. Like I would rewrite sentences over and over. And then, you get a star for credit or whatever. But it's like when you're a student like with an IEP being so tracked on all of these academic goals and they're like, well, they're not meeting all this. And it's like, a lot of other learners like also
Yeah.
just they're not like at a 100% accuracy 4 out of 5
Yeah.
times. Like I don't know
I
what you're
mean,
saying.
I'm a
For sure.
35-year-old adult. It's still like I still struggle. Like I could read something and I'm like, what did that say? Like I have to reread that. Like
Yeah.
like it's yeah, there is definitely a very unrealistic expectations on kids with disabilities where it might take a little extra time and that's
Yeah.
okay. Like they might need a little extra support. That's
Yeah.
okay. Um, but yeah, there's like definitely this defeatist attitude of
Yeah.
like, well, they didn't get it the first time.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so they must
I
not know. Like,
I talk a lot about this, or like when I do trainings with teachers, I talk about the Venn diagram of like how to support a student in a general ed classroom. And it's like, what's the goal of the assignment? And then what's the goal like for the student? And that's like even referencing their IEP goals. And then it's like you have to find the middle. So it's like if the whole class is getting a page and there's a picture on it and they have to write a story about that, like it's like, okay, so the goal for the class is like creative writing, or we want them to write something. And then for that student, do they have a goal to practice writing? Do they have a goal to come up with their own ideas? Do they have a goal to
Mhm.
like label things? Like what is their goal? And then how do we make that worksheet go with their goal? Like how do we
Yeah.
find that middle ground? And and I feel like in my head, that sounds really easy to do. But then when I'm working one on one with people and they're like, oh, well, they gave us this worksheet, so I guess we'll just write his name and like turn it back in. And I'm like, no, no, what? Like, like, and so I'm like walking them through. I'm like, okay, so what's the goal of this? And they're like, well, he can't write. I'm like, okay, so what's the goal that he has? Like, why are you like just dismissing it? Like, and I know people get so mad at I on TikTok. I have a lot of people mad at me being like, everyone just says get creative, like, and doesn't give you examples. And it's like, well, like, because I
But
can't
it's so
always give you an
individualized
example.
too.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
so individualized. Like
yeah,
it changes from one person to the next. I
Yeah.
also think like I think that the whole goal thing is really great in the sense that you're saying it, right? Like we should figure out their individual goals, especially as it can apply to like the education setting, especially like the gen ed setting. Um, but it's interesting because I hate goals.
Oh, they're
Like
the
Courtney
yeah.
knows, like I
yeah.
don't like goals. Um, but so when Cyrus, my son, had started pre-K, um, his first, I guess, like his first semester or first semester, he ended up getting a report card. Like, I don't know why pre-K is getting a report card, first off. But I remember,
Was it just like slashes? Like those
no, he was like
it's like
legit
actually
graded.
A, B, C, D?
Yeah, he was graded. I think it's like 1 to 4,
Really?
but he was
Oh,
graded and graded on
interesting.
things like, can he tie his shoes? Like, no, he cannot tie his shoes. Why are you grading it? Like, I don't like. I think my jaw was on the floor. I think Courtney probably got like a whole earful from me because I'm like, what is this? I had to call an entire meeting and I was like, this is not equitable. Like, how can you like grade him on these things? And I kind of came in hot with it because they were very understanding. They're like, oh no, we'll do a narrative report card. Like that's not a big issue. I was like, great, perfect. So he had first year pre-K with the narrative report card, second year pre-K, same thing. And then he went into kindergarten. And I don't know where that translation like fell off from pre-K IEP to this IEP, but for whatever reason, that wasn't put in his kindergarten IEP. So after his first semester, he got a report card and was graded again on things that I'm just like, at least give like a not applicable. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
at least do that. Don't give him a 1. Like, what is happening here? And I was so angry again
Yeah.
because I had to send like this email and I was like, I just don't understand how, like as a team, you're not sitting down together and being like, this is not an equitable grading system, especially for a student like my son, right? And I was like, he is working literally on hundreds of goals every single day that the rest of the class doesn't have to work on. And
Mhm.
none of those are being acknowledged. Like, literally, just going to school is a goal that other kids don't have to think about because, like, he has epilepsy. Like, sometimes he doesn't sleep, he has a lot of sleeping issues. Like, these are things that, like, he can't always just go to school.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I
and I
actually
was
feel like there could be a whole training on like how to write better IEP goals in
yes,
Oh,
general.
yes, and I was just like,
Because yeah.
I was just really upset to see the things that he was literally given a grade on. Um, and just like, I think that there can be a lot more done to not have to put like kids and parents in that situation because I had said to them, I was like, my son deserves to get something that we can sit down at the end of the day at the family table and be like, you did amazing in school. Like, we got your report card. You did so great. Like, look at all of these things you're doing. I'm like, I can't do that with this. Like, I'm literally not going to tell him he got a report card because of what this looks like. And it's just really frustrating. And I wish that educators understood, like, especially people who work with IEPs, like, you may see, I don't know, hundreds of parents, right? Like, you may have been doing this forever, and like, this is what you do all day, every day. For us, you're the only people we see. Like, we're
Yeah.
not dealing with hundreds of educators. We're not dealing with like the mass amount of people that they're dealing with. And so I just wish that there was like a little bit more understanding. Like, we're going to get upset because we do feel like sometimes it's all an afterthought. But for us, it's like, you're the only people in our circle. And we understand that we're not the only people in your circle, but there needs to be kind of that like middle ground, right? Of like,
Hmm.
okay, like maybe just think about it. Like, do
Yeah.
parents want to get this type of report card? Do the students want to get this type of report card? Is this even appropriate? Because it probably isn't.
Yeah.
So that's
I
my
mean,
soapbox.
the the not being equitable, I think, is like a really good point of like I can the tying of the shoes like drives me up the wall. And I could totally talk about that forever, but I feel like this is a good time to talk to kind of switch over and talk about emergency plans that are supposed to be in these IEPs, these, very 30 to 50 page documents that have everything about our child. Um, and I do think it could be very overwhelming for teachers. I mean, I remember my first day teaching, like with a new group of students. They're like, yeah, go over and read all the IEPs. And I'd be like, no, I am going to go through and read like maybe present levels. Like I went through the areas that I'm like, I want to see like what the last person, because you're also not like really learning about the student. You're like more learning about the
The
last teacher's
perspective. Yeah.
perspective of the
Hmm.
student. And I felt like that would kind of put like this idea in my head already. And then the kids would get there and then I'd be like, oh, that's like none of you are what I was expecting because that's not
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Um, but I digress. That's not even what I was trying to talk about. What I wanted to talk about was in these IEPs, we are supposed to have emergency plans for students who can't independently leave if there's an emergency in the building. And I think this gets overlooked a lot, or people kind of just write stuff to be like, well, we at least, it's like checking off a box. It's like, well, we've done it. We have a plan. Hopefully, we just don't ever have to use it. Um, but that is not really, as a parent who's going to be sending my kids to school, I'm like, that sounds terrifying that I want to make sure that my children are all going to get out safely.
Yeah.
So, what are your guys' stories
Oh
in
my
this very simple
goodness.
topic that we're going to talk about for like 15-20 minutes?
Oh, so bad.
Well,
So,
I think it's also just like a fair in general with like the state of everything right now, right?
Hmm.
Like I don't think anyone really feels safe in school, and I don't think we feel safe sending our kids to school. And it's like even more so because they are non-ambulatory and they are 100% dependent on somebody bringing them to safety. Like it's terrifying. It's terrifying.
so it's interesting because at Leno Specialized School, I did not have much thought about this. I'm going to be honest, because the way the school is designed and for how many people there are per student, it's they're equipped to handle it. They do these drills all the time with kids that are use mobility aids or have other disabilities. So it's I never honestly thought about it. But then we transitioned to his local school, and holy shit, the school is his our local elementary school is not accessible. It's not accessible. There's one entrance he can go in, one entrance he can get out. It's not accessible. Don't get me started. So, which is part of why we're also advocating currently in the city, in our town, like our town, to renovate the school, to add more access points, to add on to the actual school, because Lino can go in one exit. He can't even go in the main exit. He can go in one exit, and that exit, once he's in that's the only floor on a like 4-story building that he can access. There's no other access anywhere else.
You're making me sweat.
The building's incredibly old. And one of the first things we started realizing was the security drills, the emergency drills. So for fire drill, there's an exit. He can get out into the playground, right? But he is the only student that goes there. The entire other school goes across the street because you need to be a certain distance away from the building. I'm like, well, you got him trapped in a playground not far from the building. So how is this safe? What if
Yeah.
the building explodes? What if something flies out of the windows? That's why kids go across the street from the building. This is a safety thing. And that was one of the first things we realized. And in that exit, there wasn't even an actual viable ramp, and they couldn't even turn his wheelchair. So theoretically, if there was a fire, they don't even have a way of getting him out. And they were like, well, he's still small enough we can carry him. That's great. Thanks for that. But that's not how that should be, right?
Yeah.
And that is still something we're actively working on the school, because we still have to figure this out. It's not figured out yet, but they're definitely on board, and we're working towards it, and they're aware of these concerns. Another issue was the stay in place drills, like when somebody, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
enters the school. So that happened once, where his nurse was in the restroom with him, and they were like saying, now get on the toilet bowl. What?
Mm-hmm.
He's in a wheelchair. How's he getting on the bowl? And they're like, well, we don't want to, I guess the goal is like, you don't want to see the feet. Well, that ain't happening, right? Because
You're like,
there's
but
my
there's an
son's
empty
wheelchair.
wheelchair. Like,
It's just an empty. And was she holding him on the toilet bowl? And
Oh
it's
my
just a
God.
and we advocated to adjust that. We got them to place a lock on the bathroom door, first having, so now they can lock themselves in the bathroom if they ever needed to. So we worked for that. And then it's just been like, then they told us, they were like, okay, well, because of the current issue where the fire drill exit, they haven't really sorted out what that's going to look like. They came up with a new system that they have 10 people that are assigned to my son. And he doesn't need 10 people, but the idea was, how many people can we get? So depending on who's located where in the building, somebody is closer than somebody else. So there's 10 people assigned to my son. But currently we don't have any of this in his IEP. Our IEP meetings coming up, because these are all new things that we just discovered were actual issues, because we never had this problem. We never had a problem of like, how is he getting out? Who's going to be with him? Who's in, like, that was never an issue in a specialized school. So it's been a little unnerving. I'm not going to lie, because it was like, what do you mean? Like there's really
Yeah.
no safe space for him.
yeah, no,
Yeah,
no.
it's been
We So we even my when I was a one-on-one aide for a student, it was a classroom. It was an inclusive school, but there were still like special education classrooms, and then throughout the day we all had schedules going into other areas. Um, but most of the students used either like some sort of mobility aid, wheelchair, walking aid, whatever. And we had, and it was kind of a building like that where it was, I think it was called two floors, but there was also a bottom floor.
mm-hmm.
Um, and to get to the playground, I mean, it was like stairs everywhere. So we did like those students that used wheelchairs had to use the elevators to like get up and down, or maybe there were different ramps. Like they'd have to go all the way around to get to like the one ramp. But for like we all the aides had to get trained on like the emergency protocols, but we didn't like really practice them because they were very extreme. Like we would be taking everyone out of their chairs and putting them on these like beds where we would be like
Mm-hmm.
running down the stairs with them, not running, safely
But
getting down the
yeah, of
stairs with
course.
them. Um, and so they had all these things and they were there, but I just always remember thinking like, we've never really like what is our flight or fight mode going to do if there
Yeah,
actually is an
Yeah,
emergency, and we
yeah.
don't
yeah,
really know. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, we're just like taking kids out of wheelchairs and trying to get downstairs, and then we're like, what, it's freaky, I guess, is
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
my
no, for
my
sure.
son's school thankfully is like super accessible. Like it's one floor, like ground level. So he can like go in and out of every entrance and exit. I think like his classroom right now has their own entrance that like if they have to leave in an emergency they can. So we're never really like worried about that. I think I'll be a little bit more concerned next year when his classroom doesn't have their own exit and entrance. And I know I had mentioned this, like his emergency evacuation drill says like well, two people can like put him out of a window and like, and I'm like, he's 40 pounds right now. Like he's only getting bigger. And that's like, so the way his tone is like, he's literally just like, like a limp noodle almost, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it's really hard to even maneuver and do that without hurting him. And like, I understand,
Mhm.
like, okay, some bumps and bruises, maybe even a broken leg's better than like whatever could happen in the school.
Would
But
you
it's
describe your aides as like two very strong human beings? Like,
like, for no.
No.
because I'm seeing me, like I would say that I'm strong, but I would only be able to probably push the child out the
Yeah,
window. I could
Yeah.
not, I would not trust me to be like,
like
drop
lift him
them.
Yeah.
down. I mean, I wouldn't
Yeah.
even trust myself. Like I
Like
feel like
that'd break my
con-
back.
yeah, like
They,
I
I don't think I'd
feel
catch them.
right. Yeah. All
Yeah.
things considering, like, I think, me and my husband are like the strongest when it comes to him, just because, like, we know his body and we know how to maneuver him and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a scary mindset to have. We just live in a time right now where anything's possible. And it's a really scary reality that, like, an emergency or a lockdown could happen on any given moment to any
Yeah.
school.
Yeah,
Yep. For
man.
sure.
Well, I hope that
I
your
know.
IEP teams get their act together and find ways that help you guys feel safe, like sending your kids and feel like that there's a good plan. Um, yeah, 'Cause- I mean, and
Yeah.
I recently after the LA fires, I did an episode with this person. I'm totally forgetting her name right now. That's I feel really bad. Um, this is my extrovert problem that I meet too many people and it's just an issue that I have. Anyways, that's not what I'm trying to talk about. Uh, we talked about like emergency planning, like at the house, and she was talking about how it could be really overwhelming. It could be like so overwhelming that we just don't even want to do it. That we're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, like we'll figure it out if it happens and hope it never happens. Like I think it's a very common way that our brains are just kind of like kind of disassociating of like I don't even want to think that that will ever happen. Um, but she put it in such a good way. I want to say her name's Megan. I can't believe my brain. Um, but she was saying like, so if you needed to leave the house right now for 2 hours, like what would you need? And like kind of just keep extending that and making a plan. Like, you don't have to think about being evacuated and your house burning down. Like, don't think about that. Think about right now, if I needed to leave just myself, what would I need for 2 hours? Like, do I need my phone, my wallet, like some water? And then what if I'm leaving with my family? Do I need to bring like snacks? Are there any like emergency medical things that I need? Like, what do I normally travel with when I'm gone for 2 hours? And then like, okay, we're going out for a meal. What would I need? I'm going out for a day. We're going overnight. And basically like just like keep adding it on until you have like a system that you feel comfortable with and like um, but that was just one of her like mindset tricks of like, how do we, like we don't need to plan for everything right this second. How do we plan
Yeah.
just for this?
Yeah.
And I really liked that that way of looking at it because yeah, when the
Yeah.
LA fires were happening, all I thought about was like, if there was a fire right now, what would I take? Like, you know, you throw the kids and the dog in the car, and then do I just like go grab my clothes because I love my clothes so much? Like, that
Yeah.
doesn't feel like
No.
that doesn't feel like the reasonable thing to grab.
Yeah, it's a lot of planning. And I don't like, listen, it may sound like Courtney and I are sitting here like all frustrated and stuff, but like we can't fault the schools or the staff really because like all of this inclusion and, this is all new in the grand
Yeah.
scope of existence, right?
Yeah.
Like schools were not built to have kids like our kids in them. Like our kids got institutionalized. Like that's just how it was, you know?
Hmm.
And you have these really old schools that are now taking kids like ours and they're just like, whoopsies.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
didn't really
And
Yeah.
I
think that
think
one
that's
through.
that's like such a beautiful way to look at that, that like you're not coming in being like, you suck. We're gonna fix this
No,
for my
No,
kid. Like
no.
no, no,
it's
no.
you are going in with like, okay, how are we gonna make a plan? How are we gonna find a compromise? Like
Yeah,
being very reflective that we all have our own like biases and perspectives and values, and like how can we make sure we're all doing what's best for the
yeah.
students, which is like, I don't know if people are starting to go into education for the money, but I'm assuming they do it the reason why I did it, and that was because we loved teaching children, loved like being around kids and like giving them, that positive learning environment. So it's like
Yeah.
that doesn't end because a student has a disability. Like
No,
it's,
it's just like you just have
yeah,
to evolve. Everyone has to evolve, and I think
Yeah.
having like the teamwork and the communication is really important. I know I
Yes.
touched on like educators work with so many parents, but we only work with them. So like I do
hmm
feel sometimes communication can be a little lacking on the educator's part. And again, like it's not their fault. Like they have a gazillion people they're working with. They have parents that are probably bitchier than I am. Like, like I get it. Their plate is very full.
yeah,
Um, but sometimes it does fall on us as parents to just be like, hey, don't forget
Hmm.
us. Like, hey,
yeah,
how can I help support my child? Like how can we work together to make sure that this can be accomplished, even if that means like I have to take stuff home on the weekend to put it in my son's eye gaze device. I'm fine with that. Give it to
Yeah.
me. I'll do
Yeah.
that. Like you don't
Yeah.
have to do that. You got a lot going on. And I also think like parents especially need to kind of have the mindset, because we have a lot of friends who are like kind of just entering into the IEP world. And we were there like what 2.5 years ago, so we get it 3 years ago. But I have this mindset where it can feel, and I just said this to Courtney the other day, it can feel really intimidating, right? Like when you're
oh
sitting
yeah,
down
Mhm.
in front of the team, and it's so intimidating. And I still feel that way sometimes. And I've kind of shifted my mindset where instead of feeling intimidated by them or like feeling nervous to ask for things that I know my son needs, I'm like, I shouldn't be scared about these things. I should just be annoyed. Like, if somebody's going to sit there and be like, we don't think your son needs this, like, I'm not going to feel nervous to push for it. I'm going to feel annoyed. Like, you're annoying me because I know my son needs this. So I think just kind of maybe shifting that mindset of like, don't be afraid of these people. And I don't
yeah.
think that these people are in it to prevent you from getting what your child needs. Like, that's not their goal. Maybe it's the school committee's
I
goal,
was gonna say
but it's
maybe some higher up
like,
people I could say that they were like, let's save the school money, but that's a
exactly.
personal problem.
But go to your school committee meetings.
Yeah.
Yes.
um, but people who are working with kids like our kids, like they genuinely want to do what's best for them.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
just, it's like, they have to go to the higher ups. And
Yeah.
And it's stuff that they say all the time of like, okay, here are your procedural safeguards. Would you like these? Do you need to go over them? Like, okay, now we're going to do this. Like for the teacher who is like doing all the case management for, like 9 students, they are, they're not, I mean, they're trying to like keep straight 9 IEPs with all these goals
yes,
and, with all these different teams managing all these schedules. And I do think like it's definitely like teamwork that, I mean, I don't know. I feel like the biggest fix is that like districts really do need to be like, okay, we're giving you some sub days so you can do IEP stuff, or
yeah,
like
mm-hmm.
there is some extra work that, but I do know every district and state like does it differently, because I've seen places where like the teacher isn't the case manager. They have hired a case manager. And I'm just like, that is wild to me, because I'm like, they don't even know the kids. And now they're doing the IEPs. Like, I don't know, hire some subs or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and I mean, teachers need support. Service
Yeah, for
providers
sure.
need support, just like we need support. And I think there's this mindset like you got to go into an IEP meeting like gloves off and fighting and this and that, and it's like you don't have to. Like,
No,
yes,
yeah.
fight for what your child needs, but also this is a team effort from
hmm
everybody that's involved. And if you're gonna go in and just like want to tear everybody's heads off, That's not
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
No, it's not. No, I think that's really the best advice I could give anybody either starting off in this process or if you've been in the process, if you need more advice, is honestly open up that door a little bit to be a little bit more of like a team player in the sense like we I felt in the beginning, just prime example of what I'm trying to get at. I felt in the beginning, I had to go in there and I had to be aggressive. Like
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I had to be aggressive. And this is based off like other parents' stories, other districts that have been, I've heard horror stories, this, that, and the other thing. And I really honestly didn't give my district much of a chance in the beginning. Like I was kind of like standoffish. And I found that that was really the wrong approach. It really was.
It
A
really
lot of
is.
it is like,
Yeah.
it's such a bad approach. And it really is just going to cause a lot of friction. It's going to cause a huge divide. And that does not benefit your child at all.
Yeah.
And it becomes more of like almost like an ego thing at some point. And you're just like, I gotta
Yeah.
let this go a little bit. I gotta be more willing. And the biggest thing I realized with transitioning from the specialized school to the public school is that now I'm way more involved with the district in a
Mm.
sense because this is like I'm in their school. And realizing that like just asking for more check-ins. So we do like since the transition, I've been checking in like every 30 days just to be like, hey guys, like, because like we'll just find like the safety measures. We're just finding things along the way. And in our case, as far as I know, Lino is the first child with a physical disability that requires a mobility aid in the school. So everything is new to them, just like it's new to us. So it's a lot of like, hey guys, this is like all the things like I've noted in the past like 30 to 60 days. These are some things we can work out. These are some things that are problematic. These are some things you guys did great. Thank you. Like just kind of across the board. And it's really opened a huge door between us and the district that like
Yeah.
we just feel very safe in their hands. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to have to advocate or fight with them sometimes for certain things. I get that money is involved and the accommodations my son needs require funding. So I get that I will always have some level of pushback to a certain extent, but it really makes the whole relationship feel like it's actually for Lino,
Yeah.
and I think
Mm-hmm.
that has changed everything for us. So I think that's the best advice I could give is honestly be very transparent but also vulnerable to a certain extent. Like I just had a meeting with the admin of my district just to tell them like, hey, I'm just a mom
Yeah.
and I love my kid
Yeah.
and I literally just want him to have like the best experience in school, and that was like literally the 20-minute like meeting I had with them was just me being like, oh, just please love him.
Yeah, I love
you
that.
know I was advocating for something related to his nurse, but I asked them for the meeting because it ended up being resolved prior to the meeting, and they were like, do you still want the meeting? I was like, yes, I do. I just want to tell you that my son is great.
I mean, I
you
think
know
that's important to like
It is.
humanize yourself. That like there's so much
I think it's really
paperwork, there's
important.
so many like, things that people are trying to do, and it's like this is still like a human life. Like we are
Yeah.
still trying to figure things out. No one is saying anyone is perfect or not perfect. Like, and I do think that I mean, I feel like just in general, everybody needs some more like socialization classes, especially after COVID. I feel like we've really decreased on like how
We're
to
all
have,
cold, right?
yeah. But like how to have these like conversations where like you're allowed to disagree with people and communicate.
I think he's coming to see you guys now. Look at him. Get
He's
out of
just
here, you.
excited to see us. I was gonna say because our conversation sounds so good, but no, you have headphones in, so he hears you laughing. Um, what was I saying?
Having like
Oh,
conversations.
yes.
Yeah.
Um, I've thought about this because I had a friend who was like dating someone at work or something, and they were like, how you shouldn't date people at work, and I'm like, or like at school, or like maybe it was a classroom. Gosh, I can't remember. But it was like in an area where they go to a lot together. And I was like, I feel like that like human beings should know by now that like relationships have like their place in their life. Like we're not always friends with everybody we were friends with for all of our lives. And like we can like come and go and not like have this like mortal enemy like and like that we can disagree or we can just like not get along and not want to be in each other's like hang out. Like I wish that there was more like human behavior studies
Yeah.
that we can
Yeah.
like all understand each other more.
Yeah.
Anyways, we have talked for a long time.
We
And
did,
I
but
don't
it's
know if I
been so
told you
fun.
guys, I do tarot card readings at the end of my podcast episodes.
I love this.
And I just kind of learned how to do tarot card readings a little bit better than me reading the book that it comes with. So we'll see how it goes.
I'm
So,
so excited.
I'm so excited.
do you guys want to do like a dual one together, or do you both want your own
I don't know. What do
tarot?
you
It's
want, Court?
Duel kind of sounds
Yeah, I know it's kind of like
fun.
our vibe.
It'll be ours.
do you guys have a question? Like, do you want to do a question about like your podcast, like what your
Ooh.
best friend's life and your next
Oh.
trip that you guys are all going to go somewhere in another
Mm.
country together?
Oh, we I was trying to convince Brittany to do
I
that.
know. I know. I know. I slacked with our passports, so but I'm doing it now. No reason
Oh,
at
that's
all. I'm just doing it.
Do you want to ask a question about our podcast?
Yeah, let's do that.
I don't know,
Yeah.
are we doing good? Like are we making an
Sure.
impact?
Oh, I
Oh,
love
I
that.
like that one. Courtney, I love you.
Okay, so tell me when to stop shuffling the deck.
Oh, Courtney, you do it. You.
No, okay. Stop.
Okay,
I don't know
let's
why I
see.
had to.
No, the hand motions are actually really important. Okay. We got four of wands. Oh my God. Oh my gosh. I almost knocked over my water all over my stuff. Okay. Okay. So what I've recently learned, wands. Okay. Wands is fire. Ooh, and it's all about creativity and passion. So wands is
Oh.
all creativity and passion. There's like four little planets and they all look really happy. I know these are cats and this is not, there's no effing cat on here.
There's no
But
cat.
there is like a face. Okay. I was gonna try not to look at the book, but I'm gonna see what the book says about this one anyways. Because this one looks really happy, and I know that the wands like facing up is really good. So if it's like creativity and passion, I would say that is like it's looking up, like it's gonna do really well, in my opinion. So let's see. Let's see what this says. Okay, so yeah, it says happy reunions and celebration. Which I feel like I didn't even say
Ah.
reunions, but you already said you've taken a break and now you're going to come back and it's going to be
Oh
bigger than
my
ever.
goodness.
The rainbow sprawls across your life as a good omen of what is to come. And that says
Oh.
party time. It's a
Oh.
great time to celebrate with loved ones, party on, and enjoy this happy time. Oh,
See?
this
This is
is
meant to
really
be.
good
I
because
like that one.
the last couple cards I've picked have not been the most positive, and I've been feeling really bad.
You're like, well.
I'm like, well, it just says that you're going to be really stressed out for a while. You just have a lot on your plate, but like it's
Hang
gonna
on,
turn
okay?
around. I'm feeling really confident.
Well, I
So
love
that was good.
ours.
I love that one.
I
It
love
was
that
perfect.
one.
It
That
It
was
was
was perfect.
perfect.
And I
Oh.
feel like that is so spot on for the vibes, the energy that I get from your podcast. So
Oh.
Oh,
I'm
thank
excited for
you.
whenever you two come back
Oh,
and
We'll
thank
be
start
back.
dropping
you. We'll be
episodes.
back. We'll definitely be back.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Is there anything else, any more final words of wisdoms or tips that you want to
I think like
shout
my
out to
only thing
people?
is like I know it's a very privileged take, but if you are able to and you're privileged enough to, definitely consult with an advocate for school stuff. Like they just you
Mhm.
don't have to go in like guns blazing. They just know more probably than you do. Like they know more than I do. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that that's, an okay thing to do, because sometimes I think there are recommended, like for us specifically, there's like recommendations that are made that our advocates like, maybe not the best.
That
So,
sounds like a good sounding board too.
Yeah.
yeah.
That like
Yeah.
it's like their specialty and you get
Yes.
to like really
Yes.
bring
And you
that
don't have to
collaboration
agree with
in.
everything. Like, you don't have to like agree with all of it, but it's just nice to have somebody who's more experienced and, also advocating for your child, and with that experience is really important. But
Yeah.
it's a privileged take. So I know it's not accessible for everybody to do. But if you can,
If you can't get an advocate, use Chat GPT.
yeah.
Have a chat with Chat GPT. Just put
Yes.
in your concerns, ask for, let me tell you, it's a great way to also, if you find that you have trouble articulating the best way to advocate for certain things for your child, Chat GPT will put that in a beautiful form that you could
Oh
just be
my
like,
gosh.
exactly, that's what I was trying to get at.
And it
I
also,
love that.
it does also give advice. Like, if you're unsure of something, like type it in and be
Yeah.
like, should I fight for this more, like to be included in the IEP, or like is it a concern if it's not in the IEP? And like it will give you reasons why you should or should not be concerned. And I think that that can really help, you know,
Articulate an
guide your
argument.
decision too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really
Yeah.
does. It helps
Yeah.
kind of builds a little bit of confidence, but it also helps you really like articulate your argument if you need to have an
Mm-hmm.
argument, or like guide your decisions, which, sometimes that's really all we need. And honestly, in a lot of states, advocates are hella
And
expensive.
hard to get. We have like a
Yeah.
Yeah.
6 month waiting period. Our
Yeah.
Oh
advocate's out
wow.
of state, because I was just
We
like, I'm
yeah,
not waiting 6 months.
we
Like,
looked into an advocate in the beginning, and it was a $5,000 retainer fee, and we were expected to at least have to pay another 5 to 10,000, and we were just like, well,
I mean, at that point, just like take an online course.
that's just
right.
not going to
Like
happen.
you become
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
advocate.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah.
honestly what ended up happening, is now it's like that's really the role I take on. I also another great tip, and I, as much as I hate Facebook, I do use some of the Facebook groups for like IEP stuff. And I
Hmm.
don't agree with everything that goes on in them. And a lot of the posts I'm like, but then you get some people that really just have really great insight. You really do.
Reddit is
And
a good place for that too.
yeah, yeah,
Reddit
yeah,
is
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's another place where you might get some that's like, but there's some really great insight, and you do have to weed through some of it. But when you end up having to be the advocate, you just got to use those extra
Yeah.
resources when you can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel like technology has brought, I know there's so many dangers behind like social media and like to our own mental health, but it's also like so like all these support groups, all these just like like people who can communicate, especially like I have a few friends who have children just diagnosed with extremely rare diseases, and
Mm-hmm.
they've been able to connect with people like across the globe of like, the 5 kids that have this
Yeah.
diagnosis.
Yeah.
Like they
Mm-hmm.
get to have some sort of conversation of like, so what are you doing about this? Or what, yeah, like there's so much positive. Oh, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
ChatGPT. Oh my gosh. That's how I write my podcast blurbs. I
I
seriously don't
know.
know. And I am like a writer. Like I like to write. And I, for some reason, cannot do better than ChatGPT. And I probably give it too much information. I'm like, oh, I
I
did
know.
this and we talked about this and we did
Oh
like
no,
I give this whole
yeah, yeah.
thing and they
No,
send it back and I'm like, man.
I do it like about medical questions sometimes, and my
Oh
husband's
yeah.
always like, "Stop giving it our information." I'm like, "Well,"
I know.
I was like, "But I throw in a
But
lot of thank yous and pleases, so like if it comes
Yes.
back to attack us, hopefully it knows I'm a good person."
I
Like,
I had a friend tell me that there was a study done that people would like some people were mean to it and some people were nice to it. And they said that ChatGPT like doesn't treat you any differently based off of your like human behavior. But I'm gonna go with you that I'm always
yeah,
nice to it because I'm
I'm
like, if
always
you're gonna take
nice.
over the world,
I'm
I
always
hope you
nice.
remember that like
Yep.
I'm
I'm
really
like, I
thankful for
I
you.
appreciate you so much. That's what I always say. I'm like, I appreciate you a lot.
I
Gotta be
love
nice to
that.
Chat GPT.
Please don't kill me.
Oh my gosh. I love that. I'm going to start saying that. I've just been saying thank you.
Yeah,
Somehow I feel like
I really
I'm like
appreciate
bottom
you. That's
tier. I'm going to start telling them how much I appreciate
yeah.
them and all their
They
hard
really
work.
like hearing it too. Like
They- Oh my gosh. I love that
uh,
so much. Well, thank you so much, Courtney and Brittany, for being on here today. And I am so excited for your
yeah.
reunion episode when you come back.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you
us.
so much for having us, and it was so fun chatting.
Yay. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Seriously, every step is a positive step towards inclusive practices. So you are doing amazing just literally being here. I am so proud of you. Okay, that is it. I will see you next week. Inclusion starts with you, and I just want to help. Bye.